does it pencil out in a worst case scenario? Yes or no? If the answer is no, it doesn't mean the deal is dead. It means I need to go back. If I'm truly interested in the deal, I need to now become a better.
Welcome back, investor, to another episode of Passive Income Adventures. We got Frank Iglesias today from Atlanta, Georgia. Hello, Frank.
Hey, Emma.
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk to you. You're a veteran who's been doing this for 15 years. You've got a bunch of rental homes. You've been around the block a bunch of times. And the wisdom that you have learned from investing in real estate full time is really going to add a lot of light to our listener who's oftentimes they're trying to figure out, I want more passive income. I want to go on more adventures. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to pay for those adventures, either with time or money. Is this whole thing actually a scam? Does passive income really exist? And all of those questions we ask ourselves when we start wanting to diversify into real estate. So I'm really excited for you to share your experience with us today.
No, I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, there's a lot to be shared on everything you just said.
Yeah, and you're a business owner. And one of the things we do on this podcast, other than just teaching people how to go on more passive income adventures, is also how to run their business more efficiently. A lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, or maybe they're professionals, but they're higher executives where they're making some of those entrepreneur, founder, owner types of decisions and trying to figure out how they're going to balance what they're doing, especially if they're being paid well for it, and to figure out how to add real estate to their portfolio, and just trying to get a sense of how can I run my business better so I can really focus on what I do well, and then taking that extra money and diverting it into real estate as a limited or passive partner versus somebody who's going to make the decision to run a real estate professional business, either part-time or full-time.
Yeah, and what you were talking about right there just a moment ago was business fundamentals, which even that is a topic in and of itself, as I learned through the School of Hard Knocks. So I used to be an IT professional, and I did that for 15 years, and it was a good career. Had a great time, worked on some great teams, mostly corporate, but I had some consulting years in there, which I found that I really enjoyed. But I couldn't stick with it because my children were young at the time. They needed to have home every day. So as cool as it was, we couldn't really go down that path. So by and large, it was corporate. And toward the end of that, say about 3 years before I got out of it, I got the email, and it came from Rich Dad Poor Dad. And back then, everyone wasn't being blanketed with 100 emails about how to do real estate. Right? So it really stuck out in the inbox. I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's interesting. And so what did I do? I went to the couple-hour seminar. And of course, the eyes are like, whoa, what is all this about? Because at that point, my perspective on investment was stocks, mutual funds. That was what investment meant to me. The idea of investing in real estate never really crossed my mind. I had an interest in real estate, but it was always like, oh, you could go be a real estate agent and sell houses and maybe do well and make money. The class became the 3-day seminar. The 3-day seminar becomes the spend, 18 grand, I think it was, on 3 courses. Well, after I did that, January 2009, we bought our first house. So we put it and we took action, and okay, we own a house. And we bought it, and it was a small rehab in rent. Going off my memory, I want to say it was maybe $8 grand. So it was small, but this was a lot of properties were cheap and didn't need a lot of work. Now the world was falling apart, and I'm like, cool, we can buy houses cheap. We did that house. We went to refinance it. And when we went to refinance it, there was this thing called bank failures going on that you recall. And we were apparently being funded by a wholesale lender. Long story short, the day of closing, we went and signed docs. Happened to be the same day that I guess it was the Fed, the FDIC, whoever it was, shut the bank down. So I had a closing package, and I was told the wire was in the queue to fund, and it never came. So it was like, wow, this is my first deal. Anyway, we did end up refinancing it. And that was a whole story in and of itself to get it done. But it was like, welcome to real estate. But hey, now we're a landlord, and we have a 30-year loan at whatever, I think it was like 5.5% back in late 2009. We did that a few more times while I did corporate, and then I finally just got bored with IT. I've been in it 15 years. We all had a supercomputer in our pocket at that point, called the I. And so it just became very commoditized. And we literally just got bored. So I pivoted, jumped in. I did have a friend who was a business owner in the tech company that kind of encouraged me because I told him how I tried this thing called wholesaling at the time. But ultimately, I left IT because I was bored and we dived in. And it's been a ride since then.
Yeah, it's interesting how you describe this because my husband was also an IT professional, and I call him a cog in the white collar factory because he never really made a ton of money doing it. When he first got into it, it was in high demand. And then over time, like you said, it was commoditized and he wasn't getting the kind of raises and things that he needed. He just really started to feel like he was a factory worker. And that's a very different story than business owners or professional executives who are earning a very high income. And that was a question we had to ask ourselves. Are we going to keep doing this white collar? Are we going to go and start our own business doing real estate and really earn a higher income? And so for us, it became a simple issue. Like he's going to keep doing his white collar IT thing. And I went out and started a real estate business because that was my highest earning potential, but he had that stable, steady income. So at what point were you, and you made the jump? Because for us, it was very scary. It was a huge decision and a huge pay cut for us to just say, hey, we're going to go survive on our rental income. How did you come to that decision?
So we had seen, okay, we can buy rental properties. And by this point, we've been introduced to wholesaling. We've been introduced to fix and flip. So we saw that, okay, there's multiple avenues here that we could pursue. But the thing is, in my IT job, it was a great company, fantastic team, fantastic people, good pay, solid, very solid, good benefits, not far from home, and in a great part of town. And we lived in a great part of town. There was nothing to not like. Bottom line, there was nothing to not like, but I was ultimately bored. So unless the company did some projects to spark fresh interest, we just got bored. An ironic part of the story that I share, and it's true because when I made my decision, I didn't know this. A week after I left the company, a bigger company announced they were buying the company I left. Literally, one of my friends texted me, we just got bought by such and such. And I was like, wow. So the team I was on a few months after I left ended up pieced out anyway.
Those mergers can be really tough. Even if you make it through the merger, that you have redundant staff. And so there are a lot of cuts to be made. It's just integrating those new systems can be a huge pain. So a lot of times people will just jump ship when that happens and think, I'm going to go off and do something else. That's basically what happened to us after my husband's last company was acquired. Just all of the politics of working with a much larger company and all of the new systems that he needs to learn. And you'd think that he was like the opposite of bored, but he just got to the point where he's wondering, like, why am I doing this for somebody else? So founders really just struck gold there, got rich. And he just sat back and he said, I just can't keep doing this for somebody else anymore. And he needed to start his own business.
Yeah, no, I can empathize and respect that. And the job I had prior to my last one, it wasn't a company merger per se, but they had brought in the idea of VAs. And it was the first we'd heard of it. So we had our data center, again, tight team, great people. And all of a sudden they start outsourcing it to a company. And it was not a good experience.
It creates a huge decision-making matrix for people who are just trying to figure out what they want to do. And for most of the people I know who earn a much higher income, the decision is a lot easier, like just passively invest in real estate, keep earning this high income. For those of us who are doing like middle income, it sometimes can be a tough decision because we're leaving that stability and that regularity of that regular income. But it's enough, that security is enough to keep you there. I think this is why W-2 workers do not get a lot of tax breaks, because that security and that safety, most people want that. Most people are craving that. And so can you tell me a little bit about how your life changed when you made the decision to be like, I'm this real estate thing, I think I could make this work?
I will never forget when I came home on the last day of work. I was set up for my son at the time. We were big on Legos. And on the mantle of our fireplace, he built the word freedom. And that was like super cool. This is at the time he was 7 years old. So he had made that. And so it was like a happy, joyous thing. And for the first few months, it was happy, joyous, even though we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. But hey, it was fun. We did a little bit of the flipping. We would still go out and try to get a rental. We got introduced to lease options, for example. Did our first sandwich lease option. which was great. The cash flow wasn't particularly great, but we sold it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later and made a healthy profit. Then introduced to coaching, and that, of course, accelerated, opened the mindset, opened the growth. I remember going to a Tony Robbins thing for the first time. It was like all of that. And so there was a lot of positives that were stacking, maybe not in the neatest fashion, because the one thing I didn't have was fundamentals. And the problem with real estate is a lot of people learn real estate without understanding just fundamental business.
They don't
And
understand it is a business. They
sorry.
think they call it real estate investing, and it's not investing, it's a business. And some people just don't even understand that this type of real estate that they're talking about is a business. And so they don't even think they need the fundamentals because they don't even realize they're running a business.
Exactly. It was taught in a bubble when, in fact, real estate's just a vehicle that sits on top of business fundamentals. Now, I didn't know that at the time. So we just did what we did. And we had ups and downs, but overall, the trajectory was up. Coaching was very helpful. And so those first few years went pretty well. And we were pretty happy with what we were doing. And we were just steadily improving.
What was most of your portfolio looking at that point in time? What were you holding? How much of it was rental homes versus commercial versus private notes?
It was pretty much rental homes. Anything we held was rental homes. And if I recall, it was all Atlanta based at that point. We hadn't spread out in other places yet. We were introduced to notes. We were introduced to larger things, but we didn't have the confidences. We didn't have a coach specific to that area. I'm a big person that I want someone to hold my hand the first time. So I'm a big proponent of coaching. And the crazy part is when you make the mistakes, because real estate is a slow moving vehicle overall, you can make a lot of mistakes and not feel the pain for months, if not years. And that's what happened to us later on in our journey. That's what ultimately brought us to my being introduced to business coaching. And that's really when things started to shift, because now we're starting to see things through a totally different light. And you're like, oh, it would have been nice to know that 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago.
Tell me about some of the business fundamentals that you were missing and what that cost you in those errors that you were mentioning, then what you learned from that you aren't going to repeat.
So I'll use one that I think can be super relevant to anybody listening, and that's gross profit and net profit. When I first learned to buy rentals, people would pitch the idea of, all right, you want to make 15 cash on cash return. Then the hedge funds came along, and you started hearing the stories of the hedge funds. They're happy with 10% or 8%. And then after they were around for a while, this hedge fund only needs 5% return because they're going to pay their investors 3%. Now, this is pre-inflation blowing up, right? So obviously that wouldn't work today. I had a colleague that told me, Frank, when you buy a rental property, if you own it for say 10 years, it's very likely that a third of the money you'll make will go to expenses. And if it's commercial or just multifamily, it could easily be 40, 50%. And when I started learning about commercial, that's what I learned. So this is similar, just the numbers are bigger and the expense rate, the expenses are more. So when I learned about business fundamentals, what I learned was we should aim for our properties to gross 30% with a net of 10% in a worst case scenario, which means fast forward over a decade, you're really aiming for 15. This sounds really familiar. So even though the noise of the market, you should have 7% net, Frank, you're great. I'm like, no, it's not great. And so I will tell people I want 15% net. So my worst is 10. People will laugh. And I'm like, that's fine. You can laugh, but that's what we're after. If we can't get it, we're out. It's not worth it, because we also know the pains that can happen when it doesn't work out. And I don't buy big multifamily buildings, but I have met people that in the past year or two have had to write some pretty big checks to refinance some properties. And that's not a happy place because the cash flow is not strong enough. What was going on with the debt and the structuring of the debt. We took that philosophy of 30% gross, 10% net. We just apply it to all our properties, whether it's a flip, new construction, rental, didn't matter. And what I realized when I applied that philosophy to properties that we were already done with, they were gone. All the properties, I don't know about the majority of them, the ones that worked well, we were good.
Was that a day one fundamental that you had defined in there that you said if it doesn't meet that, we're out? Or is just if it doesn't meet that, we're just not going to buy it in the first place?
Yeah, if it's not going to meet the 30-10 rule, generally speaking, we're out. Now, the gross you could tweak because you might be in areas like I buy here, I know what the municipality is doing, it's growing. I may get it back in appreciation because there's a clear roadmap that shows this area is going to improve in the next 1 or 2 years. Then maybe you might, maybe I'll do 25% there because there's something to offset, or the cash flow is so good. But what I learned I cannot compromise on is the net. Because if the net is compromised on, 100% of the time, the deals I did not work at, 100% of the time, the net wasn't what it needed to be. It was not. And when you think about real estate being slow moving and the time and really the mental capacity that goes into it, if the net's not there emotionally, it's not worth it.
I agree because it's very stressful. That was one of the reasons I got into commercial real estate from single family. I knew at the beginning I wanted to go commercial because just from my previous experience, B2B customers are always going to pay you a higher profit margin than B2C customers. And so for me, I knew that commercial was the way to go from the very beginning. I feel like there are a couple of things like you mentioned that are different. The expense ratios, yeah, can be a lot higher, but so can the savings. The economies of scale are huge there. Another thing that worked for me was being able to keep everything in one spot. That mental stress that I had over a single family house was identical to the amount of mental stress I had over a 100-unit apartment building. It wasn't any less stress because the house was smaller, it had less zeros. It's like you're losing money, it's a lot of money, or it's not working, whatever it is. Some of the most stressful situations I've had in my real estate investing career have been one tenant that's annoying. And it's causing me as much stress as a large building. So I feel like their stress level just maxes out. It's like when you're hungry and then 3 hours later you're still hungry, but it's not more hungry. For people who fast, they find that hunger level, it comes and it goes. Sometimes you can feel it, sometimes you don't. But it's not I'm hungry today, so tomorrow I'm going to be 10x as hungry. No, that's the same with stress level. I'm stressed about this, I'm stressed about that. For me, it was like, why don't we just go bigger? Because it's not like I'm going to be more stressed if we go bigger.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Human emotions, human emotion. We
Yeah.
feel the stresses, the pains. The body doesn't know the difference.
Yep.
And even though our mind might try to make it logical, at the end of the day, the emotions. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And then you mentioned the smaller deal sometimes is the biggest headache, and I would concur. Our cheapest, quote unquote, cheapest rentals, hands down, those are the biggest headaches, without question. It's just a headache. We actually tried to get into multifamily in 2020.
Mhm.
We actually flew up to Chicago and we were looking at properties and we're like, we were going to do a 1031 and we were about to go into contract for a building. We were going to exchange the whole thing. And then the commercial lending shut down.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I guess that was not good timing, Frank. So it is something that we've looked at and we've looked at a good bit since now that things have settled back down, but the interest rates are high. And I have no problem buying at a high interest rate if I can meet my ratios, the numbers make sense in a worst case scenario. A fundamental I learned that I never learned in real estate class, and I'm not picking on real estate classes, just my reality. Do deals off the worst case scenario, which is different from saying, I'm going to do a deal and then I add a contingency. The worst case scenario is what happens with the property, the municipality, the market, the unknown, natural disaster, like really walk through legal/insurance. Because what happens, a perfect example is I'm building a house in an urban market. People steal stuff. When the lumber prices jacked up, people would literally show and they'd walk out with thousands of dollars of lumber. All of a sudden, you got an insurance claim. The insurance will take care of it. True, but you got $2,500 deductible. So you're still out $2,500 minimum.
And then they raise your
So-
rates for the rest of the project.
So you don't want to call them if you don't have to, right? So I want to do deals that make sense in a worst case scenario within reason. Can we absorb a 50% market drop? Probably not. Could I count for 20%? Yeah, you could do that. Will that cut out a lot of deals? Absolutely. Am I okay with that? Yes. I want to be very disciplined. Only buy the deals. If they're going to stay on my books, I want them to make total sense.
There's a thing about if there's money burning a hole in your pocket, it gets people wanting to take action. Maybe they're on a 1031 clock and it's ticking. Like you got to identify or it's, hey, I need to buy something before the end of the year so I can get the depreciation. Whatever the motivation is, when you have the cash ready to deploy, it creates a sense of urgency that sometimes causes poor decision making. What I've noticed is that if I have money sitting and ready to deploy, suddenly all the deals start coming in because people find out that I've got cash ready to deploy. It's the same thing when we started raising capital. Let me show you my deal. And so the deals start rolling in when you have capital. Have you seen that in your own investing where it's keeping that discipline changes, or your commitment to being disciplined changes depending on how much capital you have available, whether it's your own capital or private money partner capital?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've evolved in that. Like, I did not start, everyone thinks they're a disciplined buyer when we start, but not really. You don't know what you don't know. So you think you're doing the right thing, when in reality, you are doing probably the best you can with what you know. It's just what you know is not as developed as it needs to be. So, yeah, the whole money burning, the whole thing, did we experience that? Yes. Did we have a period where raising capital was easy? Yes. Probably again, that was during the time I didn't have coaching. It was the worst thing. I'm like, if capital is too easy to raise, beware. I would rather have capital that's now they ask quality questions.
Okay. Questions. It's up to us to tell them, like, these are the questions you need to be asking. This is the decision making process you need to go through. Because if they don't go through a normal decision making process, there's oftentimes a lot of either buyer's remorse after they place the capital, or if anything goes wrong, they are not ready to absorb that. So tell me your experiences with that a little bit about keeping that discipline when you have private money. Hey, Frank, I heard you just quit your job. You're the real estate wizard. Let's invest together. How do you keep that under control? That emotional reaction.
I don't know if you can, but I guess what my experience was is we did very well with private capital for several years. And then we had a period where we got into too many things again. When I didn't have the coaching, we got too much capital. And when problems happen, all of a sudden, Frank became an unpaid shrink. And it's painful because if you're ethical and disciplined, you want to do the right thing. So what it ended up doing was creating a big mess, because then some people act outside of our circle acted unethically, and we'll probably, that's a whole conversation in itself. And it just created this whole thing. So now all of a sudden I'm the people manager. The more time I'm managing people, the less time we're actually getting it. And it becomes very challenging. And then all of a sudden I had a cleanup project that's to this day, we're still cleaning some of that up. And we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a little more to go, because it's the right thing to do, but it's going to take time. But when you go through something like that, you realize undisciplined money is one of the most dangerous things in this business, in my opinion, because undisciplined money, not only does it not know what questions to ask, if you don't have all the right questions to ask, because you've never experienced pain at a deep level in business yet, which was my situation. I'd never experienced deep pain in this business. Now I have, and had to recover from that. But if you haven't, now you got two people that have never experienced it going through it together. And it's who's going to be the shrink to that? So it gets really challenging. And looking back now, I'm like, why did this happen? And how can we make sure it doesn't happen again? We have to be super disciplined in every aspect of business. We can't have the money burning, hole in our pocket feeling. We can't feel like, oh my gosh, somebody's ready to lend me $1 million. And if I don't find a deal today, that they're going to give it to somebody else. Guess what? Let them give it to someone else. Because if they're in that big a rush to force you to make an undisciplined investment, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Let them burn a hole in someone else's pocket, and then you don't have to be the shrink. Yeah, we've grown to really appreciate being disciplined in what we buy, discipline in how we deal with capital. A lot of time, because they'll say, oh yeah, someone's got $100,000, now you can raise $100,000. You hear that all the time, right? It's nothing.
Yeah.
But it's like the worst advice.
Yeah.
When you go through pain, you're like, okay, someone says they got $100,000, maybe borrow 20, 30, that's it. Certainly not more than half. Absolutely not.
That was a mistake somebody made to borrow private money from us the first time we were approached to provide private money. It was before we were ever real estate investors, and we had been saving up to purchase a house that we wanted to do like our own fix and flip, like a live and flip. And somebody approached us, and we knew each other very well. He knew we had saved up about $100,000 and asked if we wanted to make a hard money loan and for $100,000. And I thought, that's all the money we have. Like, I trust this guy. He definitely knows what he's doing. He's been doing it a long time. So we ended up turning down the loan. And my husband told him, he said, if you'd asked us for 25,000, 50,000, we probably would have done it. But when you ask for 100,000, he's like, I don't need 25. I don't need 50. There's no way we ever would have put the entire 100 grand in, no matter how experienced we were. That's a business fundamental right there that a lot of investors don't understand. How do you walk through that process of making the decision of how much to risk of the capital on a particular project?
We've done a lot of sizable projects now, and it's a tricky question because everyone gets excited when there's a good opportunity, right? And as soon as everyone gets excited, what happens? Emotions go up. We're excited. Oh, this sounds good to do that. And we all know when emotion goes up, intelligence comes down. And that in itself is a very key fundamental. So what I've had to learn is, again, going back to that 30-10 rule, does it pencil out in a worst case scenario? Yes or no? If the answer is no, it doesn't mean the deal is dead. It means I need to go back. If I'm truly interested in the deal, I need to now become a better negotiator. Far too many people, and I've seen this in single family, I've seen it in multifamily, and I'm sure it's no different in commercial, will take a deal and force fit it to make it work rather than become a better negotiator, which is going to take more time, more effort. Oh my gosh, someone else is bidding on it. They might get it instead of you. Mr. I got $10 million, needs me to deploy it in 10 seconds. And then all of a sudden, you sacrifice the fundamentals to get a deal done. You compromise the discipline to get a deal done. When really the fundamental and the discipline we need to be better at is how to acquire. Because when we know how to acquire, we can do whatever and we have the patience and the discipline to know they're only building more properties in this country. Matter of fact, the world population is going up. I know investors in various continents, real estate's kind of real estate everywhere. There will be more opportunities. So avoid the I got to get something done mentality and be better at how to buy. Because when you master acquisitions, the rest of the game has a much higher chance of success. Yes. And if you buy right and it meets the formula and it's you vetted it, if you're getting private capital, they vet it. If it's hard money, commercial, whoever's putting up money, everybody can look at it. If a worst case scenario happens, we can all look at it and say, you know what? Everybody felt great. It penciled great. A freak thing happened. Now everybody's starting position to deal with the problem is in a much better state.
That's true.
And that makes a huge difference because nobody can say, you didn't do your job or you did it right. And no, everybody vetted this. Mm-hmm. All in agreement, which is why we all proceeded. At the end of the day, real estate's a team sport. And I've learned if I'm going to vet capital, attorneys, CPA, it doesn't matter. Anybody, do they have the level of understanding and discipline to look at this the way I'm looking at it? So that we're all looking at it with clear legs, no emotion, professionally, the numbers work, the risks are analyzed. It just puts everybody in a much better place so that if the worst case happens, like a pandemic, I was one of those guys. I had a property, it was Airbnb, and overnight, Airbnb was like, oh, all the money's gone. Fortunately, VRBO handled it better because they were like, it's not the host fault, so they split it 50, which to me, that made much more sense. Because we bought that property, we actually converted it to a long-term rental. One of my rules of short-term rentals, when I have a short-term rental, it has to work as a long-term rental, period. There is no such thing in my world of, it's a great short-term rental. Great, can I rent it regularly? No, but it's a great midterm, it's a great short-term, but when the next pandemic that God forbid, hopefully will never happen, happens, I gotta know that I can just put someone in there and just let it ride.
When commercial lending dried up in 2020, I had a deal under contract and I just went to the owner and negotiated a pretty unique seller financing situation because he knew commercial lending dried up and he still wanted to sell the property. So sometimes I find that the opposite of discipline, where people are too careful, it's almost like the opposite, the anti-discipline. So they're so disciplined that they're killing every deal by being too conservative. So I find that sometimes analyzing discipline, you have to come at it from both sides. One, you're being too crazy, too emotional, getting too excited. You're ignoring fundamentals in the numbers or fundamentals in the team experience or fundamentals in the market. Or ignoring opportunities that are coming because they're so disciplined that they're not actually disciplined. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I actually agree with you. No, it makes perfect sense because what you're talking about is another aspect of acquisitions, which is the creative aspect. When there's uncertainty, there's opportunity to create things that otherwise we may not have seen. To me, that's just a part of being good at acquisitions, to be able to look at a deal and say, all right, the fundamental basic way that we all know and love is not going to work. But Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we could do A, B, C, D, E. Here's how it takes care of you. Here's how it takes care of us. It's going to take more time. There's external factors that are beyond anybody's control. Let's come up with a solution that works with that you and I can both still be comfortable with.
Yeah, it's interesting to be able to take it from both of you and make this deal work. Because one way is we're gonna try and kill it, and then there's that fear that comes in, and then they're not thinking creatively, "Okay, how can I make this deal work?" And some people usually find themselves either more in one camp than the other. So if you struggle with, "Oh, we're gonna figure out a way to make this work. We're gonna get creative. We're gonna go down every avenue," and sometimes you end up with a bad deal that way because you just couldn't let it go, versus the other side where they're trying to kill the deal and they're like, "Oh, there's just no deals out there." So catch us up to what you're working on now. You've been at this for a while. You're probably could retire if you wanted to. What keeps you going today and driving you into your future goals?
I don't know if I'll ever retire, and my wife will tell you I don't do the sit still thing real well. What I do know is we actually had a pivot that you could argue it got away from us, but in reality, I also believe everything happens for a reason. I don't look at it that way. But when we got into bigger flips, we got into full gods, additions, pop to top, all that. And then we got into new construction. And when we got into new construction, that was exciting. And this is where the mistakes happen. We ended up buying too many too fast. And then we took this mentality of, I have flipped 5 homes at the same time before, as a simple example. So we'll just multiply that by X to do X number of deals because we've done. Again, this is where the lack of business fundamentals don't work. It doesn't work that way. You don't just say, I'm going to flip 5 to going from 5 projects to 10 is like flying from Atlanta, where I am, to China. It is a massive, even though it's only 5 properties, because the fundamentals involved. Because if you're doing 5, you're running a business. 10, it's an operation. It's that significant a leap. Every one of them was a unique project. So the mental capacity and overhead to make that, it was like going up a steep roller coaster. We gained an extraordinary amount of experience very quickly, which was great. But at the same time, not every project was successful, which was not great. So we also had to learn about what massive pain felt like. So yeah, we'd had massive success, but we'd also had massive pain. So I tell people the first 9 years I was in business, we didn't lose money. The worst thing that ever happened, because when you go 9 years and you've never lost and then you lose for the first time, that was a huge hit. So if someone tells me I did my first deal, I lost money, I'm like, man, we got that out of the way. We're going to leverage that the right way moving forward, because it's a whole lot easier to fix it in your first year than it is your 9th.
Yeah.
So then what we did was we started and wrapped up a bunch of projects. Long story short, we actually wound things down. I used to have a whole construction team in-house, all 9 yards. I don't find a real estate investor. I feel like I'm just a builder. In reality, it's because that was what was going on. It was crazy. And that really was not the goal. But the reality is we also learned that all GCs are not built the same. And builders are a small subset of the general contractor population.
Mhm.
We learned that the vast, I think it's something like 80+% of general contractors do not build. So it's a very small number. So your mind thinks, oh, they must be like the upper echelon. Absolutely not true. And then production builders versus spec builders are like 2 different things. So we actually took production builders and put them in a spec environment, which is a total formula for failure. It does not work because the mindset in building production is radically different from building spec. And I've since met a person who I happen to, and here's the crazy part, I actually knew someone that was doing both. I didn't know he was doing it. I was like, why didn't you call me 10 years earlier? But he was like, Frank, I've done both. It's 2 different mindsets, 2 completely different. So I ended up becoming the builder because I kept having these production guys coming out. And then on top of that, I have this investor mindset of get a GC for the best price. But the reality is your quality general contractors, they're usually working for homeowners in the single family space because they pay more. And so we learn quality construction, quality managers, they cost money. That is hard to be a good GC. I have tremendous respect for the people, the companies, the firms that pull it off. Tremendous respect because I've seen it firsthand. This is hard. There's a lot of moving parts to do it well. But ultimately, in learning all of that, we learned a tremendous amount. And so now construction comes pretty naturally because we've done it plenty and we can apply that to any deal. But we've really been pivoting back to first and foremost an investor. That was the goal. So it was like we took this idea of investing in new construction and we became a victim of our own success. We got too many properties, too much capital, no coaching. It was the blind leading the blind both directions, going back to who's vetting who and all that. We just didn't know. Had we had the right coaching, we wouldn't have made those mistakes.
Scalability is a different issue when you're running a business. Just because you can do 5 properties doesn't mean you can do 10 properties, because the project management level, taking away what you learned from that, moving into the future, people like us, like, we don't retire, right? But we do really value our freedom. We like to be able to say, my child is going to have their first baby and I want to go spend 3 weeks or a month there to help them. I found really great airline tickets to this exotic place I've always wanted to go, so I'm going to drop everything and go. Like, that freedom that we're all seeking from passive income, yet we can't retire. So because we want to keep working and doing and building. So how do you reconcile those two pieces of wanting that freedom and flexibility in your life, at the same time really relishing what you do for your income?
It's a great question, and it starts with great help. Too many times we settle for less than the best. And a lot of times, again, we go back to we don't know what we don't know. So we'll go hire someone that we think will be a good person. And I remember I read a book, and I can't remember what it's called. I hang it over here on the bookshelf, that talked about how to hire people. And it was very helpful because we used to have a lot of people in-house. But what I ultimately learned was you cannot just get the best person you can afford. Just get the best. Don't fall into the trap of they're nice and I can teach them. You want them to be teachable, but they need to have I'm the best at it. And it really needs to be the drive, the character, because at the end of the day, you got to trust them. Are they going to be loyal? Are they going to be supportive? Or are they going to be okay, it's 5 o'clock, I got to go. Or, oh my gosh, it's Saturday. The idea of doing something on the weekend was like heresy. It was just like, oh my God, smart person, nice person, but real estate, unfortunately, is not a 9-to-5 profession. Not because we would love for it to be, but unfortunately, things happen on weekends, things happen when you don't expect, and sometimes we do have to deal with it. So I learned that wasn't a fit. I think to get that freedom we seek, we have to have the right help, because we can't do it alone. We have to have help.
Yeah.
And so whether it's the marketing, the administrative, the transactional, whatever the roles are in the business we're doing, we just got to get them. And we're probably not going to find them in 5 minutes on an ad in Indeed. It's going to take time. The reality is it's probably going to take time. You got to take your time vetting them. We got to take our time to be absolutely clear that we actually know what we want before we talk to anybody. In fact, I would even close that question with being absolutely clear in what we want makes the ability to achieve that goal much easier. Far too many times people get into investing and they'll say this: I want financial freedom. Great. I want generational wealth. Great. So are you thinking about your grandchild's grandchild? Because are you really thinking that far ahead? Far too many times we use this thing of what's our why, which is this question, right? The financial freedom we seek, and we give it an intellectual answer rather than doing an exercise like 7 levels deep where we really get to the crux of it. I wrote down, and I'll use myself as an example. I had 15 goals a few months ago. Wrote them all down. When I did the exercise on myself, it really came down to just 2 things. I didn't really have 15 goals. I have 2 I just have 15 things in my head, and in
Yes.
my soul, it's really just two things.
What are those two things?
So the first one is whatever I want my time to count. Whatever I do, I want my time to count, whether it's family, friends, business. I need to know my time counts. The worst feeling is when my time doesn't count. And two, I want to be involved with experiences that are enjoyable. So going back to a rental property, I rent a property in a market in Atlanta that, quite frankly, I don't care to go to. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, except when I have to go, I'm not going to do it. I've learned, and that's just me. Some people, they could care less about that. But for me, it matters. Everybody's different. When we look up top 10 rental markets in the United States, I did this exercise a few days ago for the Southeast. All right, here are my top 10 in the Southeast. Great. As soon as I looked at it, I crossed 7 cities out right away because I was like, I have no desire to visit any of those cities. They might be great markets, but I have no desire to go, so they don't meet Frank's criteria. And I'm going to put my effort into the other three. If I have to go, even if it's just once, I'm totally cool. Let's go. I want my time to count, and I want it to be a quality experience, whatever I do. That's not a big, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't matter how much money the property makes. If it doesn't feel good, emotion is emotion.
Some people would say that is an emotional decision. That we're not saying don't make emotional decisions in real estate. I don't want that to be the message that anybody ever takes away. Sometimes it is about emotion and being able to identify when that is a lifestyle goal of yours and it's a non-negotiable. It's important to pay attention to that as well as numbers and those fundamentals and to be able to say, do I want this? Do I like doing this? And if the answer is yes or no, we have to listen to that.
Yes. And that's the point. We got to be crystal clear. What is it that really matters? Because we could line up 100 passive income investors, and if everyone is truly clear, we'll probably come up with close to, if not 100 different answers.
I probably only met 2 investors who really did feel motivated deeply by generational wealth. I hear it a lot. I hear it over and over again. I have 6 kids. I want generational wealth because I want to teach my kids how to have financial freedom and how to not have to take as long and waste as many years as we did. But at the same time, like, that's not really, I do not care. I do not care. I don't want to count calories. That's my financial goal. I want to have enough money I can make decisions emotionally if I feel like. Now, I'm not going to be like Michael Jackson and go get Neverland. I'm going to live like a normal person who doesn't have to pinch pennies or count calories. It took me a long time to get to that point because it had nothing to do with altruism. It had nothing to do with generational wealth and blessing my children or serving the world, because those are all things that I want to do. But at the crux of my soul, I really dug in. It was, I want to have enough money that I don't feel like I'm constantly thinking about money. And that's my why.
That's the beautiful thing. And you say yourself, there are 2 people that care about generational wealth. As long as they're clear, great. Your situation was beautiful. I just want to make sure I'm not counting pennies. The family's taken care of. Everybody's good. They grow up. I raised them well. They're going to take care of themselves. So these are all good things. Everybody's different. The key is to be so clear. What drives me crazy is we go to real estate seminars. I still have the little notebook from my first Rich Dad Poor Dad seminar. I still have it. And I looked at it not too long ago and I'm like, there it is. What's my why? And I wrote down some things, and some of the things meant something. And then some of them you could tell were just nice ideas in your head. And that's the problem. For too many people, the whys are nice ideas in your head that are not congruent with the core of who you are and you really want. And we really got to get to the core.
The mindset stuff, I know people feel like they get caught up in the mindset and they're like, no, nitty gritty. I need to learn how to run numbers. I need to learn how to, if your why is important enough, it's big enough, it will cause you to do the hard things, to get the research done, to pay for the mentorship, to go do the work, to learn the skill, whatever it is. Because if your why is compelling, you'll figure out the how. And people oftentimes just leave that why hanging out, and they get so far deep into the how that when it gets hard, they tend to quit because they really don't have that original deep level of commitment and conviction and connection with themselves.
So we did an experiment that supports that 100%. We called our entire buyers list a few years ago. The whole thing, thousands of phone calls. And this is what we found. And I'm rounding the numbers slightly, but it was almost on point. 60% couldn't find it. No idea. Search party, they're just nowhere to be found. We did get a hold of it right around 40%. Of the 40%, I want to say it was around 80% or so were no longer involved in this. Gone. If they were wholesalers, 90 plus percent.
It's a hard business.
And so the reality is you might have a list of 10,000. So let's say, and I don't remember the exact number, but let's say it was 10,000 to make the math simple. That means we would got a hold of 4,000, which means out of 10,000 people that raised their hand, 800 are still involved. But if they were wholesalers, cut that in half to 400. And you start realizing we really do got to market a lot, because a lot of times when we market to people, we're like, oh my gosh, what if they unsubscribe? The reality is the vast majority are unsubscribing by default. They're just not clicking the button on your email, but they've shut down. A lot of people get in this business and their why is not clear, and you're 100% right. It just, when the adversity comes, and it will come, we're out.
Yeah, it comes every time. We started going to a mastermind recently for entrepreneurs, and it was for wealthy entrepreneurs. I don't really know how we got invited, but they invited us to come, and we started going to a lot of the events, and every single one of them has real estate horror stories. This is just a wealthy entrepreneur mastermind. They have businesses, tech companies, service company, all sorts of stuff. They all invest in real estate, and they all have real estate horror stories. And that was one thing that really hit me hard, spending time with people who have done it, who have arrived. They're older, and they're mostly in this mastermind because they just want to pay it forward, kind of the point of their career where they're not really working that much anymore, and they just really like to help people. And I realized, okay, one, I'm on the right track with this real estate thing, and two, there are going to be some pain, and I need to get ready for it. For me, even the limited partners who have lost money on deals this past year are experiencing that pain, even though it should have been passive and it should have been great. That compelling reason about why we're doing this, you just have to stick to that. So I really appreciate your discussion, sort of walking us through your process, showing us where you came from. Like I said, you've got a lot of experience, a lot of years of experience, and you're able to pay that forward. And you do some coaching, you do have a podcast. I was really impressed how, when I was asking you before we started recording, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to promote? You're like, yeah, I want to just talk about real estate and help people out. And so that is what I'm talking about with the mastermind. Is to the listener, finding people like Frank, finding people who are just out there to pay it forward with the experience because they just love it and they just want to help you. Even if they are selling some coaching, or even if they do have a product, sometimes that product is really mission driven. So find a teacher, find a mission driven person. Frank, you talked so much about coaching and mentorship and how helpful that was for you. And that it comes out of you because now you are offering to help other people. It's not a core part of your business, but it's something that you feel led to do if people want to reach out. So thank you for that. And tell us, what is the ideal outcome of this interview would be for, like, what is the ideal person that would reach out and contact you after the show? Can you describe that to us?
The ideal outcome, I guess there'd be multiple. The first ideal outcome is make sure you have some kind of professional who's farther down the road than you are helping you out. Have a coach, have that person that you can go to that can help you at any point in your journey. You want that person to be someone that hasn't just had amazing success, but they've also had significant failure. I went to an event a few years ago that was an ultra high net worth. It was a high net worth event, but there was a lot of ultra high net worth people, and 9 and 10 figure people. They shared a theme that struck me, and that was for them to appreciate what they had, they all first went through a very dark period. Had they not gone through it, they would not appreciate the ultra high net worth success that they have today. And so I encourage people, get a coach, just get one, get someone that makes sense for you and what you're trying to do. Be absolutely clear on what you want to do. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm easy to find on social media. I'm on all the big name things, so you can reach out to me on those. Or I'm also old fashioned. I like phone calls. Our number is 678-408-2228. Feel free to call us, leave us a voicemail, text us. In a world that's hyper focused on electronic messaging, I think good old fashioned voice to voice human conversation is irreplaceable.
Yeah.
And that's where relationships and deals get done.
So many people are afraid to give out their phone number. I feel like, how many people are going to come banging down your door or calling on the phone that it would be like that annoying? Be willing to go out to dinner, take a phone call. Like, it's like getting married. Somebody called a business partnership marriage without benefits. It's exactly what it is. You gotta get out there, you gotta network. Yeah, Frank, what's the name of your podcast that the investor or the listener can go and check out?
So my podcast is called What Worked for You. And it's a show that's about, I call it, it's a show from entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. And I interview entrepreneurs on their journey to success, whether they've achieved it or they're en route to it and are achieving it. And it's not just for real estate, it's for any business. We love and have grown to appreciate that everyone's entrepreneurial journey is different. Your path in real estate is probably not going to look like what you learn at the seminar or YouTube or the class. It's going to have its own twists and turns that are unique to you, and that's okay. So it's really powerful to hear other people's stories because you realize, hey, everybody's story is different, and that's okay. The other part that I really love is a lot of times as real estate entrepreneurs, we get our best ideas from other businesses that are not real estate. Because, and that's something I learned from one of my coaches, sometimes an idea that's as common as dirt in your industry can be an atom bomb in another. And that really struck me. An exercise we love is go buy a copy of Forbes and look at the ads, because people putting ads of Forbes are spending a lot of money. They probably have entire marketing teams. Leverage that knowledge and figure out, oh, I like this app. How can I spin it for my marketing? Leverage all the guys who are spending a lot of money so I don't have to. That works.
Yes, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. Like, we are running a real estate business here and it needs to have business fundamentals. Your passive investors who are portfolio managers almost look at that as if you're self-employed. You still have to have a handle on what's going on. If you want to beat the stock market, if you want to beat the index funds, you have to be willing to put in more effort than an index fund is going to require, which requires you to put on a little bit of your business hat, either as a passive or an active investor. Just get real about why you're doing this. Is it worth the extra hurdles that you have to go through to get better returns than what you're getting in the index market? So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Frank. Be sure to reach out to both of us after the show. With me, you can get it on my calendar at investwithemma.com, and we will have a phone call and we will talk about your investing goals. That's why we do these podcasts, to be able to get in touch with you after, to be able to help you, help ourselves, and build the community of relationships that it takes to make these kind of deals go around. So thanks for tuning in. We will catch you next time. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.